Hi everyone, welcome to the fifth online lecture. Today we'll start with a recap of what we did last week. So looking at deconstructing Australia's national tobacco campaign, and looking at the three sets of strategies that we can use to deconstruct the campaign, but that we'll also use to design material for a campaign aimed at sugar consumption. And then today, the bulk of what we'll do is going to be about looking at the kinds of literature that we need to review to design a campaign aimed at sugar consumption. So, in a couple of weeks in the tutorial, me and Lee Chang are going to walk you through how to write a literature review for project development. Now, I've already introduced that in the third online lecture, so you guys would have a bit of an idea of how to write a literature review for project development. Now, the reason why we will teach you how to write a literature review for project development is because you're going to have to write one, and that is going to contribute towards your mark for the final project. So again, this is something we're going to walk you through. But so before getting there, before getting to the actual writing part, what I thought I would show you guys today is what it is that you need to review, because everyone is going to be doing different projects, everyone's going to be looking at different things. So it might be a little bit hard to know where to start. So, okay, you want to design this thing, you want to work on this particular project, but where do you actually start? What kind of literature should you start to look at and review? So that's what I thought we'd do today. So looking at the kinds of literature review that we would need if we were to design a campaign aimed at sugar consumption. So we'll start with a bit of what we did last week. So looking at Australia's national tobacco campaign. And as it talks about last week, the reason why I am using Australia's national tobacco campaign as a model, as an example, to then design something for sugar, is because the NTC has been successful. Now, I am defining success in terms of the NTC reducing smoking rates in Australia since its inception in 1997. So smoking rates have decreased, as well as the number of people who take up smoking. And the age of the first time someone smoked has increased from the age of 14 to the age of 16. Now, that also has to do with the laws we have around smoking and selling cigarettes. So then, how do we deconstruct the NTC, because it's a huge campaign, there's so many different components to it. So how do we just deconstruct this campaign to use as a model for a different campaign? And so we do this by looking at or using three sets of strategies that I have been working with. So I had to find a way to use the NTC as a model, and coming up with these three sets of strategies to analyze the campaigns within the NTC was a way of doing that. And then I could then utilize these strategies here to design design material for a campaign aimed at sugar consumption. So we looked at that last week. The three sets of strategies were negativity, positivity, technicalizing, personalizing, and looking at behavior. So looking at whether a campaign focused on smoking or quitting, and in addition, whether it looks at an actual behavior or possible potential behavior. Now, like I said last week, the third set, so the behavior, something I'm still working on, so this one isn't as finished yet. So let's go through that again. So campaigns can either be more negative or be more positive in style. So it doesn't mean that a campaign is exclusively negative or exclusively negative or positive, but it just have a tendency to be more one than the other. So we looked at the Every Cigarette is Doing You Damage campaign here. So this was the one where we saw how smoking affects different areas of the body. So this was more negative in style because it focuses more on the damage smoking causes in the body. And then we also looked at the voiceover, looking at the kinds of language used, such as there was a lot of negative evaluation used in this particular ad. This can be contrasted to the Quit For You, Quit The Two campaign, which is more positive in style. So this is one of the posters from the campaign. So it's focusing on the benefits of quitting when pregnant. And this one we looked at how instead of negative evaluation, we have more positive evaluation. And instead of having more dark, dull images, we have more light, bright images that create this positive feeling. Then we looked at the second set of strategies, which were called technicalizing and personalizing. So the campaigns we looked at were health warnings and the Don't Mix Smokes Your Story. So the health warning campaign features graphic images and health warning message on tobacco products, including cigarette packs and loose tobacco as well. So there are 14 of these graphic images, and they focus on the technical aspect of smoking. So they talk about the kinds of damage that smoking causes, and it tends to focus on different parts of the body, different limbs, different organs, while a personalizing campaign like the Don't Make Smokes Your Story campaign tends to focus more on the people aspects of quitting, so less of body parts and limbs and organs, and more focusing on people, so more images of people, and it tends to focus more on the individual, so how quitting has affected Ted or benefited Ted, instead of how smoking affects people just in general. Then we looked at the last one, which was behavior. So we're looking at whether a campaign focuses more on smoking versus more quitting. In addition, a campaign could focus more on an actual behavior that you're doing, as opposed to a potential possible behavior that you could do. So we then end up with these 4 possible combinations. So the campaigns that focus on smoking as an actual behavior, smoking as a potential behavior, quitting as an actual behavior, or quitting as a possible behavior. So next week, I'm going to show you how we can use these 3 sets of strategies to design materials for a campaign aimed at sugar consumption. It's a completely new, different campaign, but using the same sets of strategies. But before we get to that, and this applies to you guys as well when you'll be doing your materials for your assignments. So before you start designing your materials, you will have to conduct literature reviews. You're going to have to read about what it is that you need to do, and there's going to be various components to your literature review. So again, in a couple of weeks, we will show you how to write it. But today, this is just going to give you an idea of what it is you need to read about, because sometimes it can be a little bit hard to know where to start. So okay, say I want to design a campaign that's aimed at sugar consumption. So what are some of the things that I need to consider? So first of all, I guess a question that we need to answer is, why is it that I want to design a campaign aimed at sugar consumption? Is that important? Is that necessary? The answer is yes, and the main reason is because of the obesity epidemic, both globally and here in Australia. So let's do a bit of literature review on the obesity epidemic. So if you have a look here at my references, This also gives you an idea of where you can look for your literature review. So if I'm looking at things on health, looking at the World Health Organization is a really good way to start, because it's going to give me quite accurate, up-to-date, credible information. So if we look at obesity at a global level, it's nearly tripled since 1975, so that's not good. And according to the World Health Organization in 2016, 30% of adults over the age of 18 were overweight and 13% were obese. So a lot of people. So most of the world's population live in countries where overweight and obesity kills more people than people that are underweight. And these tend to be in African Asian countries. So it's quite scary that nowadays it's not having a lot enough to eat that's going to kill you. It's actually eating too much and becoming overweight or obese because of that, and all the associated health impacts with that. So that's looking at it from a global perspective. But what about obesity in Australia? Well, it's actually not much different to what's happening around the world. So if we look at the National Health Survey from 2017-2018, so the ABS is Australian Bureau of Statistics. So if any of you are going to be doing stuff here locally, looking at health, not just at health, but other stuff, the ABS provides lots of numbers, so lots of stats about various stuff. So that's something you could have a look at. So here in Australia, so according to the 2017-2018 National Health Survey, 67% of Australians were either overweight or obese. Of that 67%, 35.6 were overweight, 31.7 were obese. Only 31.7% of people that were surveyed were in a healthy, weight range. So we are essentially living in a country where there are more people, around 2/3 of people are either overweight or obese. The National Health Survey also found that there were more males that were overweight than females. So 74.5% of males were found to be overweight or obese, compared to 59.7% of females who were found to be overweight or obese. So this clearly shows that obesity is a huge problem in Australia and around the world. But what's causing it? Why are people becoming more overweight and more obese? Well, there's a number of reasons. So this is part of the literature review. So there's kind of like a development to it, and I do want you to keep that in mind. So so we said that obesity was a bad thing. So what's causing it? Well, nowadays we tend to have a lot of people who sit a lot because of work. We have a lot of office workers where we have sedentary lifestyles now. We sit more than we used to before, not just in terms of work and the office, but we also tend to drive more now instead of walking more as we did before. What we eat also influences the obesity epidemic. So we are eating foods that are high in fat, salts, and sugars, and these tend to be found in processed foods such as biscuits, pastries, lollies, and sugary drinks, so soft drinks, sport drinks, fruit juices. So what we should be eating is mostly vegetables, fruits, whole grains, healthy fats, and healthy proteins, but it's not actually what's happening. We're not eating a lot of whole foods these days, and we tend to be eating more processed foods, and these tend to be really, really high in fat, salt, and sugars. So as you can see here, sugar, eating excess sugars is part of the obesity epidemic. Another reason as to why we are getting more overweight and obese is lack of physical activity. So according to the CDC, an adult needs around 150 minutes physical activity per week, and that's a combination of more cardio-based activities such as walking, and that's also different levels of intensity, so walking versus running. And we should also be doing a bit of muscle training as well, strength training, so doing things like push-ups, sit-ups, weights, and again different intensities, moderate to vigorous. So we should be doing all of that, but we are not getting enough physical activities. We are sitting too much and eating too much of the bad foods. And other factors include genetics, and that's not something that we can change, obviously. Some medications that we take as well can make us put on weight, and that might not be something that we can really control either. Okay, so now we said that eating excess foods high in sugars was contributing to the overweight obesity epidemic, but what we also need to think about is that there are different types of sugars. Some sugars are better for us than others. So we can divide sugars into two kinds of sugars, naturally occurring sugars. So these are found in whole fruits and vegetables, and they are found in milk-based products, such as milk, yogurt, and when I say yogurt, I mean the ones that don't contain added sugars, so just like plain yogurt. And these naturally occurring sugars are not considered harmful for our health, although they of course contain calories, as all foods do. So these are naturally occurring sugars. Now everything else is what we call free sugars, and they are also sometimes called added sugars. So added sugars are free sugars. So free sugars, on the other hand, so these include a sugar that is found in honey, in syrups and nectars. So whether that it's added during food manufacturing or whether we add it to our foods and drinks ourselves. So we might add honey to maybe pancakes or something. Now this also includes ingredients such as malt extract, glucose syrup, lactose and galactose added as ingredients. So again, so you can find lactose naturally occurring in milk, but when it's extracted from its original source and it's being added to foods, it's not a natural sugar anymore. It becomes a free sugar. So I think that's a good way to think about it. So natural sugars naturally just occur in whole fruits, vegetables, and milk-based products. Free sugars are essentially anything that we add to food, as well as honey, syrups, and nectars. And so free sugars are often also called added sugars because, again, we add them to food. They weren't there before we put extra in it. And these free sugars are found in pastries, so pretty much processed stuff. So pastries, biscuits, fruit juices, soft drinks, sports drinks. So what I thought would be good would be to watch this little cartoon about free sugars, about how we take something good like an apple, which contains naturally occurring sugars, and we turn it into this processed thing that has free sugars in, and it is bad for us. So here we go.
Once upon a time, there was a delicious, healthy apple called Alfie. Alfie was full of fibre, vitamins and minerals, lots of things our bodies need. But this piece of fruit wasn't destined to end up sitting merrily in someone's lunchbox. No. This poor piece of fruit was headed to a factory. Here, food manufacturers would remove nearly all his goodness by sieving him, boiling him, and removing all his water until he was barely more than a pile of sugar. Then they pushed him through a metal extruder and dried him out on a production line. This sticky paste no longer resembled the nutritious piece of fruit Alfie the apple once was. The paste was incredibly high in sugar and low in natural fibre. Alfie was no longer good for our bodies, but instead bad for our teeth and waistlines. What's worse, this sugary paste would be used in so-called healthy products for adults, kids, and even toddlers. Food marketers will use him as a promotional tool, a way to sell their unhealthy products to mums and dads wanting to give their kids a healthy life. Don't be tricked. Leave Alfie as he is, along with his healthy, delicious whole fruit and veg mates. Our kids are sweet enough.
So this is a video essentially just illustrating the difference between natural occurring sugars in the apple and then how through food processing we extract all the good things out of the apple, and we are essentially just left with sugar, and that paste, that sugary paste, is then added to foods as free sugars, and these are things that we should be avoiding or limiting. So again, so if we want to create a campaign against aimed at sugars, we need to know that there are different types of sugars. So now we know that if we were to create a campaign aimed at sugar consumption, we would be leaning towards free sugars and not naturally occurring sugars, which are healthy for us. So now that we've talked about free sugars or added sugars, we also need to know that so there are actually a lot of different names for sugar out there. I thought that I would show you this because, again, if we are going to be creating materials, we need to educate people about that, so they might not otherwise know that added sugars comes under so many different names. In fact, there are 56 different names for sugar out there, so you might be reading the nutritional label at the back of the food, and it might not say sugar, it might say a different word, and it has a high quantity of that word, but you don't know it's sugar, so you think it's good for you and you eat it. So let's have a look at that. So here we are. So this is I find this article quite nice. So it steps through the different types of name that we give to sugar. So starting with sugar and sucrose, which is something that we might all be familiar with. And we might also be familiar with high fructose corn syrup, and you might know that this is something that we need to avoid. But then it goes into the different names that you might not actually know is sugar. So agave nectar, and then it lists all these other names, all these other types of free sugars that we should be avoiding, but they've put in foods under these different names, and we might not know that these are bad sugars. So beet sugar, buttered syrup, date sugar, grape sugar. And if you see a lot of those names, they have fruit names. So grape and date, coconut. So you might be thinking, oh great, these are fruits, this is good for me, but it's actually just sugar. Refiner's syrup, treacle sugar, whatever that is. And then again, other types of sugars that have glucose in them, corn syrup, ethyl maltol, lactose. Again, this is a lactose that isn't naturally occurring in milk. This is the one that's been added to food, and it's now a free sugar. Types of sugars with fructose only, crystalline fructose, and the other types of sugars. So, if we are to be designing a campaign aimed at sugar consumption, we need to be aware of that. We need to know that there are different kinds of sugars, and we need to know that they come under different names. So again, those free sugars come under 56 different names. So this is something that we might have to educate people about. So the materials that we create may need to include all these names or have a link, like here, where people can read about those different kinds of sugars and different names for them. Again, so in talking about free sugars and added sugars, and I've mentioned this a few times already, we need to tell people, we need to educate them as to where those bad sugars are found. And some of the ones are quite obvious. So like lollies and biscuits and pastries, they are sweet, and we would know that these are processed foods. We would know that they are not good for us. But unfortunately, a lot of those fruit sugars, a lot of those added sugars are actually quite hidden in food, in what people would assume are healthy foods. And I quite like this little photo here of where you can find hidden sugars. And some of you might already be aware of this, but some of you might not. So, for example, in pasta sauces, can contain 6 to 12 grams of sugars. So 1 teaspoon is 4 grams of sugars. So this can contain up to 3 teaspoons of sugars in a pasta sauce. And it's not something that you might um, realize has sugar. I mean, it's not really sweet tasting, but that's the whole point. It's hidden in there. You don't quite taste it. You wouldn't associate that food with sugar. Granola bars, even though they are sweet, they are often marketed as being a healthy option to chocolate, for example, but can actually contain up to 3 teaspoons of sugar per bar or per serving. And like I mentioned before, so you can have yogurt that is good for you and yogurt that is not good for you. So if you're eating just plain, plain Greek yogurt, that's a healthy option. But if you're eating a lot of the flavored yogurts, they can contain a lot, a lot of sugar in them, like 8 or 9 teaspoons of sugars. Uh, Instant oatmeal as well. So oatmeal is marketed as a healthy food, but again, there's different types of oats. The ones that you buy in the sachets, the instant ones, can contain up to 4 teaspoons, nearly 4 teaspoons of sugar. Salad dressing as well. So again, not something you would associate with sugar, but does have it in there. Coleslaw as well. Tea, and when it says tea here, this is Lipton tea, for example. Um, uh, so Lipton markets it's tea as tea, but it's not tea. It contains a lot of sugar in it. Dried fruits as well, which can be good, a healthy snack in small quantities, but it's good to be aware that it is quite high in sugar per serving. Ketchup, so tomato sauce as well contains sugar. So if you are lavering your chips in tomato sauce, that's essentially adding sugar to your already fatty food. So this is there just to show you these are the things that we need to consider if we are designing a campaign in that sugar consumption. So we know that there are different kinds of sugars, free sugars versus natural occurring sugars. We now know that there are different names for free sugars, and we now know that there are some foods where we it would be quite obvious that they are unhealthy for us because they have a lot of sugars, but it would be important as well to educate people, to inform them that they are foods that are marketed as being healthy, but in fact they might not be healthy because they have a lot of hidden sugars. And again, these hidden sugars can come under these names here. So, oops. So yeah, a lot of things that you would have to read about when you are designing your own material for your project. And then as well, so we are telling people that they should limit the amount of added sugar that they eat. And one of the reasons that we saw already was that they can become overweight or obese. But what are some other complications or diseases that they can get from eating too much of these free sugars? Well, type 2 diabetes, which could be an obvious one here. Dental caries. So this is actually the most widespread non-communicable disease in the world. So rotten teeth. is the most common non-communicable disease in the world. Metabolic diseases, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So we are actually finding young children who now are suffering from non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So essentially, your liver becomes fatty, and it slowly starts to lose its function. It starts to scar until, it doesn't work anymore, and you might need a liver transplant. And so according to the World Health Organization, so there's an association between sugar drinks, so like soft drinks and energy drinks, for example, and preventable mortality from diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and cancer, with the majority of deaths occurring in low and middle income countries. So this is actually quite scary. So drinking sugary drinks can actually lead not just to diabetes, but to death from diabetes. And again, this is something that's very, very preventable. I mean, if you don't drink sugary drinks, you don't get diabetes and you don't die. But yeah, so again, this is something that we need to consider if we're designing a campaign aimed at sugar consumption. So, okay, you tell people that they shouldn't be eating or drinking a lot of these free added sugars. But why? Well, this is why. Now let's watch this little video about diabetes. This is in the UK. You might know him, Jamie Oliver. He's a chef. So I think I like this video. So this is a documentary. This is just a snippet of it. But essentially, a huge issue with a lot of these non-communicable diseases, like diabetes, cardiovascular disease. Yes, they are preventable, but also what happens is they can be quite a burden in the health system. And this is something that he talks about here.
Type 2 diabetes is increasing on an alarming scale in the UK. There are currently 3.5 million people with the disease, costing the NHS almost £9 billion per year. And it's only going to get worse if we continue the way that we're going. This is a specialist foot clinic. Type 2 diabetes can affect the nerves and blood vessels, resulting in wounds that can become ulcers and, in the most extreme cases, can lead to amputations. Julian has recently had his foot amputated.
I didn't know I had diabetes at the time. A couple of toes had gone gangrenous and got infected.
Losing limbs, removing limbs, trying to save limbs all feels quite medieval to me. I find it utterly shocking.
Hello, Ralph. Hello. How are you, mate?
I did my research, and in 13 years of British combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, there were around 300 amputations.
Come on, Sharky.
But 7,000 amputations just in a year in the UK due to diabetes, I find heartbreaking. Why aren't we talking about this more?
So then he goes on to talk about some of the other issues of the types of foods that we eat. So as you can see, yes, eating sugar or excessive amounts of added sugars found in a lot of processed food can lead to diabetes, which can then lead to amputations. But this can be a real burden on our public health system, and he showed the numbers in the UK. But I'm sure this would be a huge problem here as well in Australia and in other parts of the world. Okay, so we need to tell people that eating free sugars or added sugars is bad for them, because it can lead to a number of complications, such as not just being overweight or obese, but all the complications that comes with being overweight and obese, such as type 2 diabetes, which leads to amputations, cardiovascular disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and then of course death. But we need to when we looked at the National Tobacco Campaign, the message was essentially no cigarettes. There is no safe level of tobacco smoke, but this is a bit different when it comes to sugar. So we can still eat free or added sugars, but there is a limit as to how much we should eat, and this is something that needs to be conveyed to the audience, to people. So we're not saying to cut sugar completely out of your life. First of all, there's different types of sugar, so you can still eat the naturally occurring sugars in fruits. But when it comes to free sugars, yeah, you can have, a biscuit once in a while as well, but there's a limit to it. So according to the World Health Organization, we should be eating only around 10% of free sugars in our daily intake. And so eating around 10% only is going to reduce the risk of being overweight, obese, and having tooth decay, which we said was the most widespread non-communicable disease in the world. Now, the World Health Organization, along with other organizations, are actually saying that we need to decrease that amount to 5%. So free sugars should only be part of 5% of our daily intake, which is around 60 spoons of sugars. And this then would create additional health benefits. Again, so this doesn't apply, these numbers, about 10% and that 5% that people are asking for or edging towards, don't apply to natural occurring sugars in fruits, vegetables, and those naturally found in milk. So these are the kinds of literature we need to consider when we're designing a campaign. Again, there's a lot of stuff here, and when you are designing a specific material, so for example, if I'm designing something for an adult, it might look quite different to what I'm designing for a child, for example. So educating adults about free sugars is going to look different to educating, say, 5-6-year-old about sugars. Now, another way when you're to do it when you're designing materials is to actually review the literature on existing campaigns. So have people done similar things out there? And the answer is yes, although not a lot, unfortunately. So in Australia, there's a campaign going. So it's been going for a few years online, but only recently, I think late last year or early this year, they started running the ads on TV as well. But this has actually been on the internet for a few years now, probably like 7 years or so. So the campaign here in Australia, it's called Rethink Sugary Drinks. So it's aimed at reducing the consumption of sugary drinks, so soft drinks, energy drinks, sport drinks. And so 1 in 6 teens consume around 5.2 kilograms of sugar per year from sugary drinks alone. And males between 14 and 24 are the highest consumers of sugary drinks. So let's have a look at a few of the ads for the Rethink Sugary Drinks campaign.
Comes out, pick up or run below. I started with good mark. Takes the handball there, sells the candy there, does Ryan Hudson.
You wouldn't eat 16 teaspoons of sugar in one hit, would ya? So why do we drink it? Auntie Anne at the health service said all that sugar would make you put on weight and make us sick, Mum, with like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, kidney disease, and even cancer. It could even rot your teeth, hey. Go with water instead, it's from nature.
It's a hot potato kick,
It's too deadly.
So this is actually ad on TV at the moment. So I'm not sure if you're here in Australia, you might have seen it. And let's get to the next one.
Welcome to the land of the greed. Welcome to the home of the slave. Turn everything up. Turn it. Turn everything
up. Oops. And we'll look at one last one. Okay, so the reason why I wanted to show you that and to look at campaigns that already exist or have existed is because we can use this as examples as well. So, and how do we do that? So I've showed you this already, and this is something we've done in tutorials already. So we can use existing materials to use as models to create new ones, and we do this by doing a broad PD analysis. So let's have a look at a broad PD analysis of the second ad. So that was the teenagers with the rotten teeth. Okay, let me just play it again. Oops, so this is, so we'll do a PD analysis of this one.
Welcome to the land of the greed. Welcome to the home of the slave. Turn everything up. Turn it. Turn everything
Okay. So here we go. Alright, so we start with just a list of questions, as we always do. So it's called the first T ad. So it's an ad warning young people of how sugary drinks can rot their teeth. Is it part of a larger campaign? Yes, this is part of the Rethink Sugar Drinks campaign. And right now I won't analyze anything else. So what is the goal of the thing? So overall the campaign warns young people and their parents of the amount of sugar present in sugary drinks. In addition, it also promotes drinking water over sugary drinks, as we saw in the ad with the girl and her family saying that they should go with water instead. So now some context. So who created the ad? So this was by the Rethink Sugary Drinks campaign. Why was it created? So again, to warn young people and their parents of the amount of sugar present in sugary drinks, and to encourage them to opt for water instead. This was created here in Australia last year. So any external references? So with this one, there are various organizations that actually are being promoted, one of which is a Cancer Council. You might have noticed it here. So this ad is on the Victorian Cancer Council, but it's actually part of the Rethink Sugary Drinks campaign. And at the end here, it shows all the sponsors and the people that are involved in it. So that might be something relevant to mention. So why is it successful? So the TV ad features, I should say, features young and attractive people, and this creates a very sharp contrast to when they smile, which show their rotten teeth. So other young people watching the ad would be able to relate to it more than if they were older people portrayed. So now if we look at the material sensors here, so it's with sight, so we can see it's pretty much just young people in the ads, and again this helps to align other young people, especially if it's aimed at young people. We can also see the rotten teeth, which tells the young people what can happen if they drink or keep drinking sugary drinks. And in the ad, there are various sugary drinks that are featured, although they don't name the drinks, so they don't say Coke or Gatorade, but the red can, is clearly meant to be a Coke can, and the orange bottle clearly looks like a Gatorade or Powerade drink. So this is something that young people would know. So again, telling them where all this sugar is found. Then we've got the background music, so it's quite fast and erratic, and it creates kind of this sense of urgency, urging young people to drink water instead of sugary drinks. And I don't know if I'd call them lyrics, but it seems to be saying ew, like over and over again, which again tells us that drinking sugary drinks is bad and disgusting. Don't really think smell or touch is being used here, but taste definitely. So we're talking about sugary drinks, obviously it's going to evoke the taste of sugar, which is obviously sweet, but this is then put in context with the rotten teeth. So then, that sweet taste of sugar is no longer appealing next to those rotten teeth. So that is something that we could then use if we were to create materials aimed at young people. Let me see that. Okay, now what other campaigns exist? So there's one in the UK, it's called Action on Sugar. So it informs and influences sugar reduction policies in the UK, which can also be replicated worldwide to support the population in consuming no more than the recommended 5% of total energy from free sugars. So again, we talked about that already. So let's have a look at what the Action on Sugar campaign looks like. This is just a bit of info about it. I hope you guys want to have a look. So they have lots of like educational resources about it. So here we go. Oops, sorry, I had it open. So this is the website. So one of the things that they do is obviously to tell people of the different kinds of sugars, so naturally occurring sugars versus free sugars, and where these free sugars are found. So vegetable juices, concentrates, even alcoholic drinks. And it tells you here again, milk and other dairy-based products are not included in the free sugar category, and tells you about some places or some drinks that you might think to be healthy but in fact contain lots of free sugars, like fruit juices, unless you're making it at home, of course, smoothies, etc. So lots of educational stuff in this campaign. It also educates people on the effect of sugar on their health. So, oops. Yep. Yeah, here you go. So yeah, so what's the daily recommended intake of sugar for each age group here? So it can lead to obesity. We'll talk about this again. So tooth decay. So lots of educational stuff on sugars and the effects of sugars on our health. Again, so can we use any of the materials here as a model? And yes, we can. So this is on the website. So this is a little fact sheet about educating people about free sugars and not free sugars. and this little poster here. So this is something that we could use as a model, and this is actually quite different from other TV ad that we saw. And again, this gives us two examples of something we could use aimed at younger people and something perhaps more adults. And this, of course, requires you to have a decent level of English literacy. So let's have a look at the PD analysis for this. Also, that's okay. So I'll just show you. So just that's yeah. What are free sugars? Different types. So these are free sugars. They are not free sugars. And then it also tells you, gives you a list of things that you need to look out for. So these are foods you should be limiting. These ones you should be checking carefully. These ones are okay to have. So now. Okay, so what is the thing? So it's a fact sheet about free sugars and natural sugars. It's a fact sheet that's educating audiences about the types and kinds of sugars, and also informing them on where these kinds of sugars are found. So in what types of foods, what types of drinks. Yes, this is part of a larger campaign. It's part of the Action on Sugar campaign. Again, I'm not going to be looking at other things here. So the goal of the thing, so the fact sheet aims to educate audiences about free natural occurring sugars and in what foods and drinks they are found. Context stuff. So who created it? It was the Action on Sugar campaign people. Why? Again, to educate audiences about free and natural occurring sugars and in what foods and drinks they are found. It was created in the UK, and I think it was around 2017. There wasn't really a date on there. And so why is it a successful thing? Why is this something that we can use as a model? So yeah, so it's educating people who might not have heard of these types of sugars before, and it does so in a quite straightforward manner. It's also telling them where these different types of sugars are found and what foods and drinks they should be consuming more of and less of. So it educates them about how to make healthy choices. Like I said, it also assumes a good level of English literacy. So we know that the target audience here isn't exactly, a young child, for example. Alright, so looking at this, so this is a poster, so it's mostly sight here. So the language, of course, it provides all the information. So if it was a video, the language might be in terms of spoken language, but here it's written language that's providing all the information about the different types of sugars, about where they're found, which foods we should be avoiding, and what we should be eating more of. They also use images to provide visual examples of the foods, of where the free and natural sugars are found. And colors here, actually, I'll show you how colors are used. So looking first here, so the colors are used kind of like they are how you would interpret the colors on a traffic light. So red means stop or no, and green means yes or go. So and the reason that I know that red is being used in that way and green is being used in that way is because if we go to the next page, so here red is the types of foods and drinks we should be limiting. So again, kind of like stop and think about this. And then the yellow here, it's kind of like, proceed with caution kind of thing. And then green means go. So that's how colors are being used here. And this is something that's actually used with little children as well when they're teaching them about how to make healthy choices. So they'll give kids examples of different types of foods and drinks, and then they'll tell them, is it a green food or is it a red food? So that's that. Sound, smell, touch, not really being used. Taste, yeah, of course. So the images and the not just the images, but even the foods that are written evoke how these would taste, and we could perhaps even say that depending on whether it's a red food or green or a yellow food, it's kind of like telling us to stop and think about it, and that could have something to do with taste as well. So that's that. Now, Okay, so now that the literature review is done, so what are some things that would need to consider, or what have we learnt from the literature review if we were to design a campaign aimed at sugar consumption? So first of all, we can't tell people to stop eating sugars in general. So this is not like cigarettes. So there are different types of sugars, and here we want to focus on free sugars or added sugars. And we want to tell people where these free sugars are found, what kinds of foods, what drinks, and also tell them how often they should be consuming those types of foods and types of drinks. And we also need to consider that this campaign would have to have materials to address children specifically. So when it came to the NTC, children weren't able to buy cigarettes, so there was no need to create campaigns for little 5-year-olds telling them not to smoke because they can't buy cigarettes. But with sugar, sugars are found everywhere, like in the little ad we saw with the apple. So when they reconstitute apple, it's not just used in adult food like I don't know, muesli bars, but it's also used in baby food as well, and fruit roll-ups for kids. So we would have to be careful in creating the different materials for adults, teens, and children. So yeah, so next week we'll get into the design part of it. So looking at how we can use these free strategies and how we can utilize what we've learned from the literature review to design something aimed at sugar consumption. And if any of you want to follow up on any of that stuff, so I've put the references here. And yeah, so when you guys are doing your literature review for your materials, just be mindful as to where you get your information. Obviously, I mean, we've already talked about fake news in the tutorial, so I would think that you guys would have a good handle on what type of resources to kind of deem credible, and what you should be avoiding for your literature review. So it's okay to have a look at websites, but just be careful of what kinds of websites they are. So if you're looking at things like government websites, we would assume that they are quite credible and valid. But things like Healthline as well, not a government website, but some of the stuff that we could look at it on that website. So just be mindful of that. And yeah, so I will be back again next week for the next online lecture. So have a good week, everyone, and see some of you tomorrow for the tutorials.